All right, why don't we get started? Good morning. I'm Jim Rooney, President and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, and I'd like to welcome you to our annual Economic Outlook Forum, this year featuring the Chief Economist at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and friend Curtis Dubay. I've heard Curtis speak several times about his view and the U.S. business community's view on economic conditions and where we're going, and I'm sure you'll find his perspective to be fascinating. But in addition to Curtis, today's program will feature expert analysis of the trends, challenges, and opportunities facing our region and key industries in our region like banking and finance, technology, real estate, and hospitality. As I was thinking about this annual event and what we were hearing not only at our event, but from economists making projections at this time last year, a little before, you might remember that there was a lot of projections that second quarter, third quarter 2023 would be in a recession. It would be a soft recession, soft landing kind of thing. What happened? From my perspective, my answer is volatility, uncertainty, and unpredictability won. A lot of things happened that people couldn't have considered at that time, and I don't know that the context for this year's outlook has really changed all that much. Volatility, uncertainty, and unpredictability. So going into 24, I'm sure that you have a lot of questions on your mind. I certainly do. U.S. consumer spending was positive this year despite elevated inflation and higher interest rates. Can that continue? Maybe we'll get a little bit of preview during the holiday shopping season of what might happen. Real disposable income growth is flat. Pandemic savings are starting to dwindle. Household debt is rising. Student loan repayment requirements are back. And how will that affect consumer spending? Business investment slowed down in 23 as interest rates increased and made financing activities more expensive. Residential investment started slowing down in 2021 and has not rebounded the way that certainly we would like to see. So is supply and demand for new homes going to help drive more activity in that sector? If interest rates come down, will that help both business and residential investment pick up? What about government spending? Government spending has helped boost our local economies through the pandemic and in 2023. But it's an election year. What does that mean? And what's the impact as well of political volatility surrounding fiscal policy, debt, and outlays in the federal government? So what does all that mean as we think about 2024? And of course, where's inflation going? Not just with the impact of interest rates, but adding concerns like the energy market and disruptions due to the outbreak in the Middle East. What's that going to mean for inflation, even if interest rates begin to come down? And then, of course, we all think about the labor market, and I in particular, and I see a few other people in this room, a lot of our friends are retiring. Massive retirements of baby boomers affecting the labor supply. So there's a lot of questions, and we have a lot of several terrific speakers in the panel to help us think through these issues. Before I do introduce our panelists, I want to thank our presenting sponsor. Please join me in thanking M&T Bank for their vital partnership in ensuring that this event is open and free to the public every year. So thank you, M&T Bank. And thank you to our Chamber Board member, Margaret Lowe, CEO of WBUR, and our media partner, WBUR City Space Productions, for hosting this event in this wonderful space. You should all know that this event is being recorded, will be shared on the Chamber's YouTube page. Now, our moderator today is Grace Lee, Massachusetts Regional President and EVP at M&T Bank, and a Chamber Board member who will guide us through this conversation. Grace herself has more than 25 years of public and private sector leadership experience in Massachusetts. As M&T Bank's regional president, Grace is responsible for strategic development and growth through their community banking activities. But Grace was previously General Counsel and First Deputy Treasurer of the Office of the State Treasurer and Receiver General. She was also an attorney at Morgan, Brown & Joy, concentrating her practice in employment discrimination, labor law, and commercial litigation. So thank you, Grace, for joining us as moderator today. Next, we're going to also hear during the panel discussion from Yasmin King, who's the Vice President of the Automotive Cabin Experience Business Unit at Analog Devices. Through this business unit, Yasmin creates innovative edge processing and connectivity solutions, transforming the driving experience into immersive, safe, and a personalized journey. For more than 2 decades, Yasmin's leadership bridges the worlds of engineering and business, leading to success for the business teams and customers. Yasmin, thank you for joining us today. And Adam Portnoy will also be on the panel. He's the President and Chief Executive Officer of the RMR Group and also a Chamber board member. Prior to joining the RMR Group in 2003, 2003, Adam held various positions in the finance industry and public sector, including leading a financial institution, working in private equity, and serving as CEO of a telecommunications company. So Adam will bring a perspective from a number of industries to the discussion today, and I want to thank each of them for being willing to do this. Now to get us started, I'm going to ask Grace to come up and introduce our featured speaker. Grace?
So they said I'm not going to break this if I put it a little lower because I'm shorter than Jim over here. I want to welcome everybody. Good morning. And it's great to have this event on the heels of Thanksgiving because I know everyone is well rested and focused, so I appreciate that. Well, if not having a couple of pounds to lose, that's on my part. But what I want to do is just give you a little brief outline on who we are. M&T is a super regional bank, and it's headquartered in Buffalo, New York. The Massachusetts headquarters is right here in Boston. And one of the things that I love about M&T is that one of their hallmarks is community-focused banking. And what that means, and if you guys don't know what it means to us, is that we take a very, very, very local approach to banking in every region, even though we're a super regional. That's reflected in all my team members being here. So shout out to all M&T folks here. Pat Sullivan, that's been here, I want to say forever. How long has he been around, Jim? Forever, right? He's still with us. And, we're fortunate also to have an area exec, Ira Brown, with us. So I don't know where you are, Ira, but thank you for the support. And he, flew out today. So I'm super appreciative of all that support. One of the things that, we're most proud of is our ability to focus acutely in our local economy. And we're super blessed today because the keynote speaker for today is Curtis Dubay, and he will actually put us in context to where we are nationally, and then we will hyper-focus with our panelists. And notwithstanding the fact that, as Jim mentioned, last year seems like this year. It was challenging last year. It's still challenging this year, but it's like challenging in a different but the same way. And I feel like once upon a time, it used to be reading tea leaves. This is, don't get mad at me, Curtis, but it used to be tea leaves and, kind of forecasting the economy. Now, some days I feel like, are we flipping a coin? Because I feel like, or are we just staying on the same side? And it depends on what day you are. And I have to say that volatility and the unpredictability continues. And so while we go through that, I'm hoping that Curtis will tell us, are we reading tea leaves? Are we flipping a coin? How are we going to do? So Curtis is the chief economist at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. What that means is he tracks the economic conditions, analyzes the public policies and economic growth, and runs the Chamber's Chief Economist Committee. He's also been, the senior economist at the American Bankers Association. I should really actually pick your brain on that one. A research fellow in tax and economy policy at the Heritage Foundation, and he was also a wonky accountant at the PricewaterhouseCoopers, a firm that no one's ever heard of, right? But if you Google him, you will see that we're super lucky because he's also been a frequent flyer when it comes to testifying before Congress, and that's no easy feat, so God bless you there. And he's been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, as well as the New York Times, CNBC, and Fox Business. So, I'd like to say that, we all have collectively things that we can share, but I think you kind of have it on all of us, so thank you for that. We're lucky he studied locally. He got his master's degrees at UConn. I said, go Huskies, because my son's there. And he got his bachelor's degree from University of Richmond, and what I'm really grateful for is he traveled here from D.C. and he's been up since 3 o'clock in the morning. So thank you. With no further ado, thank you, Curtis.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Grace, that was a very good intro on the economy and on the local ties. I was born in Massachusetts, grew up in Connecticut, so I'm a big Red Sox and a big Patriots fan. This is a big opportunity because I have Pat the Patriots cufflinks, and these are not the Flying Elvis. These are the old school Pat the Patriot cufflinks. And I've got the tie, but I didn't break that out today. It's 2-9 season. You can't wear the tie. I used to wear these things every Monday. I was totally obnoxious for the 20 years of the Brady era. To all the Redskin fans in D.C., now the Commanders, anywhere I'd be, just absolutely obnoxious. I wore a Tom Brady jersey after every Super Bowl they won. So this stuff's kind of been mothballed this year. I brought them out once. Can't wear it after beating the Jets. But after the Bills game, yeah, I brought them out. So this was a good time to dust them off. But like the Patriots, the macroeconomy, the U.S. economy is a bit of an enigma. We're doing way better than anyone thought we'd be doing at this point. And that is occurring at a time when people don't really feel that the economy is doing very well. They'll tell you that things aren't good. And that goes for consumers and it goes for businesses. Businesses also say the economy is not doing so hot. And it's really hard to square that circle. The hardest circle to square is the one that's about how is the economy continuing to grow at such a high rate when inflation has been high for going on 3 years now, when the economy, higher interest rates now for 2 years. How is the economy continuing to chug along? And I think there's one major issue that ties this all together and squares a lot of circles. And that is that we have a big, wide worker shortage, a gap between the number of jobs that employers, businesses want to fill and workers available to fill them. So I'll keep coming back to that again and again because, again, I think it helps explain a lot of the things that are very hard to explain right now. That's a generational thing. We'll talk a lot about this, I think, today. And it's not going to change. It's not going to change any time in the rest of anybody's lifetime. We're going to have a persistent worker shortage for the foreseeable future. But for right now, the economy is in a very, very strong position relative to where we thought we were going to be. That's what you said we were going to have a weak economy this year. And yet, this is outdated. We got new data yesterday. The economy grew at over 5% in the third quarter. Remember, we're supposed to have a recession by this point, or a very weakened economy. And yet, the economy grew at over 5% in the third quarter. It's tracking to grow over 2%. I have it at 1%, but the Atlanta Fed does a real-time tracker. They have it at 2% for the fourth quarter. So the economy is going to grow at a fairly robust rate here in 2023. How is that being able to occur? Again, inflation, interest rates. It all comes back to the fact, and this is spending. Look at the bars. Don't ignore the line. The bars, up, up, up. Consumers keep spending. That's what's driving growth, that they continue to spend. They shouldn't be able to keep spending at such a rate. But the point is, they can keep spending because if they want a job, or if they want to spend, if they want a job, they can have one. do a lot of these talks around the country, and I always ask business owners who has enough workers. We're talking over the last few years, thousands and thousands of people I've asked this question. No one has said they have enough workers. Does anybody here have enough workers if you want to run a business? No. The gap is about 3.5 million, so 3.5 million more job openings than there are workers available to fill them. And this goes for any region, any sector, any industry, you name it, any business size, everyone's struggling to get workers. And so if you want a job, you got to start paying your student loan back, got to make your mortgage payments, got to get a new car, whatever it is, you can get a job, and it pays pretty well. Wages are growing over 4%, and they've been growing above inflation for a while. So that alone will do a lot to keep spending going. But inflation remains really high. So the question, how did for so long, let me go back real quick. For a long time, the light blue line is inflation, the dark blue line is wages. For a long time, for a couple years, inflation outpaced wage growth. So how, during that period, were consumers able to bridge the gap? And it's because they had so much savings during COVID. Roughly $2.5 trillion in aggregate savings, above trend. Now, a lot of times I'll say that, and people will say, well, that's just rich people. Look, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, they saved a lot of money during COVID, I'm sure of it. They don't have $2.5 trillion. It's a lot of money. It's so big, it's hard to get your mind around it. But that money was broadly distributed. And we know now, we got some bank data that middle and low income people had a lot of savings as well. So they were able to use that savings to continue spending, keep up with inflation, and maybe exceed it to some extent. And they also use their credit cards in a big way. So credit card balances were paid down really enormously during COVID, and now have been spent back up. This is not systemically risky. We're still fairly a good chunk below the average over the last 20 years when it comes to credit card debt as a percentage of income. But it tells me it's probably people who really need to rely on their credit cards to spend have probably spent up their balances. So they don't have the savings, they don't have the credit card anymore. It was interesting. So we got a little bit of preliminary data for Black Friday and the first weekend of the holiday season, and I had no idea that this was a thing now. So there's modern day layaway. You can buy now online and pay later. I have no idea who's financing that. We should find out and short them all, because it's a terrible, terrible idea. But people, it tells me that maybe they don't have their credit cards to go to as much as they did before, and they're looking for alternative forms of credit. So credit card balances are largely spent up. The other thing that's probably a big part of why spending has been able to be so robust for so long is that there's asymmetries. So those who aren't so inflation constrained, those whose incomes are higher, usually higher, and growing faster than inflation, have been spending in a rather big way. They're going to sporting events, they're traveling, they're going to other live events. The example I use, I always forget which university it was, but it was either University of Wisconsin or University of Nebraska, they're both red. Earlier in the fall, they had an outdoor women's volleyball game. University, it was either Nebraska or Wisconsin. Which was it? Nebraska. 90,000 people showed up for that event. There is an enormous appetite for doing all the things we used to do, but in a really big way, and people are spending a lot on all those experiences. So that's really what's driving spending. The question is, how long can that go on? And I think it can go on as long as this situation where we have way more job openings than we have unemployed workers to fill them. So it can continue. Now, but I do still think there will be some softening because, again, there's only so many people who need their savings, need their credit cards, can't rely on those anymore. So as we go into 2024, I do see some softening. Now, I've been keeping a list because I do these a lot, and people, especially business owners, just don't feel like the economy is doing that well. So if I tell them that it's doing well and probably will be okay in 2024, maybe some slowdown, they really push back. So I made a list of the economic data points that would tell you that things are not as good as maybe I'm telling you. The first is that manufacturing has been in a recession for over a year now. That's based on surveys of the manufacturing sector. Small business optimism is near 50-year lows. Small businesses feel really bad about the economy. Consumer confidence is near record lows, believe it or not. I said we got a revision of GDP yesterday, so over 5%, but there's another measure of the economy that's in that report. They're supposed to equal. If you have, it's output and income. If you ever took economics, it's like one of the first things you learn. It's an identity, accounting identity. So output and income are supposed to match each other. They don't. Output, GDP, is way higher than the income measure. So something statistically might be a little bit off. Business investment's down. Our October jobs report was weak. And freight traffic is down as well. So there are things out there that point to a slower economy than the high level numbers are telling us. So all that said, what do you want to know? You want to know what's going to happen in 2024 and beyond. So here's what I think is going to happen. I think that we are going to see some slowing, that consumers are about tapped. I only got a second to look at the October spending numbers that came out earlier today. Looks like there was some slowing. So I expect consumers to slow into 2024. I think the Fed's probably done raising interest rates, so I think that impact still has to be absorbed fully, so that will slow the economy as well. So we have a slowdown in 2024. But what it looks like is really an open question. Whether it's recession or not a recession, I don't think it really matters all that much, and here's why. Let me ask you all, when was the last time we had a recession? Other than COVID, other than the few months after COVID. Everyone says 08, 09, and that's exactly right. We had the Great Recession from November of 2007 to June of 2009. But we also had a recession in the first half of 2022. The definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth. In the first and second quarters of last year, the economy contracted. The reason no one remembers that is because during that period, jobs expanded, spending increased, income grew, and manufacturing output increased. Now, those are the 4 economic data points that a bunch of really famous economists get together here in Cambridge. It's called the National Bureau of Economic Research. They get together and they date recession. So they say the economy started to turn down in November of 2007. That's why I use those dates, because that's when income started shrinking or jobs started shrinking or however they determine it. And those things started growing in June of 2009. Well, if you have a recession in the early part of 2022, and we did, it met the technical definition, like the Biden administration will argue we didn't have a recession. We had one. The point is, though, did it really matter? If all those things that what matter for people's day-to-day lives, if they're growing and increasing, and you have a recession, and no one feels any pain, does it really matter if it's a recession or not? I bring that all up because I think whether we have a slowdown or a technical recession in 2024, it's going to be the same situation. We're going to have a situation because of that job shortage. Remember, I said we're going to keep coming back to that, because if you need a job, you want a job, you can have one. That will persist regardless of the economy slowing down, because businesses are going to hoard workers. There aren't going to be mass layoffs. They all went through a period where they couldn't get enough workers. They can't get enough workers now, but it was even worse a year and a half, 2 years ago. They don't want to go back to that because it was really painful and it's been really hard to reacquire workers. So not going to lay off. If you need a job, you're still going to get one. So you'll still be able to pay your bills. So we can have a recession, but there isn't a whole lot of widespread pain. I call it the tree falls in the woods recession. If a tree falls in the woods and no one is there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. If you have a recession and no one feels a lot of pain, does it really matter? So I think we slow in through 2024. Recession or no recession probably is irrelevant. And then once we get past that, I think we're in pretty good shape going to 2025 and beyond. And the reason I think that is because back to the 2007 and 2009 experience, remember the dominoes falling? Great financial crisis, housing crisis, sovereign debt crisis, like day after day, weaknesses being exposed in the economy. That hasn't happened in the aftermath of COVID and higher interest rates. Other than Silicon Valley Bank's failure, which was partly driven by the Fed, but mostly driven by a poorly run bank, we haven't seen that. So I think once we're through this kind of tumultuous period, we're in for a period of really strong growth in 2025 and beyond. So that's my outlook for next year and beyond. I want to say a quick word about inflation. How much? I've lost track of time, so if like 2 or 3 more minutes. Okay, so inflation is cooling. It's getting better. It's not yet back to where it needs to be. The target is 2%. We're 3.2% on the broadest measure. But if the measure the Fed cares about is closer to 4. So they're probably going to stop raising interest rates, but we're not yet back to where they want to be. But the interesting point about this is going into an election year, this is a major, major problem for the Biden administration, and they're fighting it like crazy, and they're not getting any traction. And I can tell you why. It's not that hard. Egghead economists are not the right people to talk about this because they're going to tell you that inflation is over. Don't worry about it. We're going to be back to 2%. And people are not going to buy it. They're not going to buy it because inflation does not end by prices falling. They just stop rising as much as they did before. And people intuitively know this. So I've got 3 kids at home. I've got a 12-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 7-year-old. My wife went grocery shopping last Saturday, $415. That food was gone by Tuesday. But I keep a close watch on these type of things, just basic interest for my ties to my work. That same basket of groceries was $250 at most pre-COVID. So we're spending about $200 more every week, week after week after week. And so is every other family in the country. So you cannot tell them that inflation is over. They're not going to buy it. They're waiting for that basket of groceries to come back down to $250, but it's never going to happen. We'll just adjust to a higher inflation rate. That's how inflation ends. It doesn't end. Prices don't fall. Prices don't fall for a good reason. We don't want prices to fall because deflation is as disruptive as inflation, because businesses don't cut their prices because their workers don't take lower wages. Their suppliers don't take lower prices for their inputs. But it's going to take a while to adjust to a much higher price level. So that's the story on inflation. And real quick, I want to run through 2 or 3 risks to the economy because I think these matter a great deal. A lot of volatility going on around the globe and domestically. Internationally, geopolitical events matter. If Russia-Ukraine gets worse, spills over, same with Israel and Gaza. But if China ever invaded Taiwan, that's a much bigger impact to the US economy. It's something we have to really always be on guard for. Domestically, believe it or not, this Congress, the one currently can't get itself organized, isn't even a year into its session, has over a year left. It still has to pass a budget for fiscal year 2024, which ends on September 30th, 2024, a budget for fiscal year 2025 before the next election, and pass a debt limit increase. They pushed it to January 1st, 2025, which is in this Congress. So this Congress has 3 must-pass pieces of legislation and can't do a whole lot. So that's risky for the economy. I have a couple more, but the last one I want to leave you with is office space. Office space is a big issue right now. You know this around here. Vacancies are way up. Interest rates are way up. Valuations are way down. If you read the Wall Street Journal, it's like almost 2 to 3 times a week, stories about valuations. They had one this week. It was a group of office buildings that one owner had. I think the valuation was $600 million pre-COVID. The loan's back up, under $200 million valuation. So it's a third of what it was. It means a lot of building owners are just turning in the keys or trying to rework the deal with their lenders. There's not a lot of money coming in to refinance. So that market's largely locked up, but no one knows what the bottom is. So there's a lot of people waiting to come in and swoop in and buy. If you have a couple $100 million, you can get a high rise too. But no one wants to pay a higher price than even they could come down even further. So that's a problem. A lot of regional banks not super regional banks, regional banks. Regional banks hold a lot. I didn't know that. I would assume it was the biggest of the big that would hold these really big mortgages or loans on the office buildings, but it's the regional banks that are highly exposed. The reason why it's a risk for the economy, it's not systemic. I don't think we've been told since Dodd-Frank that the banks are well capitalized. They're going to take some losses. It happens. But it's a risk because it's the same banks that got hit during the SVB fallout. You get a credit crunch after that if they can't lend because they're worried about losses and the market's not really sure who has them. So we could see, and they're the banks that lend to small and medium-sized businesses. So we see a credit crunch there that could definitely have an impact on the economy. So I've said a lot. I'm going to stop there. We have a great panel, and I'm sure we'll circle back to all sorts of topics I touched on and I wasn't able to get to. Thank you.
Thank you, Curtis. You told me to make sure you guys can hear me, right? It's on there. So we appreciate the commentary, and I have to say that being hyper focused, I'm going to focus on I know that we're not technically in a recession, and we know that inflation's high, but I think the general consensus is, people aren't feeling so great. The October numbers, the unemployment numbers, were lower, historically still low, but, lower than anticipated. And I think Massachusetts had the 2 consecutive months of the highest unemployment numbers. So I guess, to the line, this is an open, kind of my question to the panelists. You named multiple factors in kind of forecasting the economic landscape. Yasmin and and Curtis, you brought up, you're gauging it based on groceries. That's how I gauge it too. You should know, right? What indicators are you focusing on? I feel like traditional indicators are kind of working, but we're feeling a disconnect. So as you guys are moving forward with your businesses, in Massachusetts, what are you looking at to kind of forecast and prepare your business and, quite frankly, your homes? Yasmin?
Thank you, Grace. So it's interesting to hear your comments about how business owners are feeling the impact of what we would consider a slower economy. Analog Devices does feel that impact. We have been stating we're feeling a slower economy, and it's primarily due to broad-based inventory corrections that we're seeing across all markets and all geographies. When we look into 2024, we're expecting that to persist through at least the first half. And anytime you predict the future, it's challenging, especially right now. We have global unrest. We have a challenging macroeconomic environment. There's an upcoming election year, as you mentioned. So there's a lot of fog in trying to predict. But there are a few indices that we look at. 2 of the indices correlate very highly to our industrial business. And industrial for Analog Devices drives over 50% of our annual revenue. So we'll look at Global Purchasing Managers Index, and we also look at the Japan Machine Tool Orders Index. Both of those indices this year had very sharp declines, but this last quarter started to show some signs of recovery. The other 2 indices that I'll look at, it's near and dear to my heart in the automotive sector. I'll look at light vehicle production, which is basically how many cars are being manufactured every year globally. And then I also look at electric vehicle sales. So for light vehicle production, we hit a peak in 2019. It then tanked during COVID, and we've been recovering ever since. When I look at 23 into 24, the recovery slows down quite a bit. So we drop from double-digit growth to very low single-digit growth. Electric vehicle sales had also been seeing a very large growth rate. They'd been jumping at about 30% each year. And when we look into 24, that drops down to 15. So overall, the 4 indices that we look at are starting to show some signs of recovery, and there's still growth in the automotive sector, but at a slower rate. So given history, we believe we're at the bottom. The challenge is the visibility into the speed and the strength of the recovery on the other side is very limited.
Adam?
Sure. So I run a company that focuses on commercial real estate. We have about $42 billion of commercial real estate, all types of commercial real estate here in Boston and across the country. But the metric we focus on being commercial real estate is interest rates. It's the most important thing. And so because of that, we focus on the Fed and we look at inflation, which is driving that, as well as what's going on with unemployment. Those are probably the things we, from a commercial real estate perspective, are most focused on. I look a lot at transaction activity, what's going on. It's an indication of liquidity generally in commercial real estate. Things are down well over 50% year over year. And so those are the things we're looking at. And from our perspective, we basically are assuming and planning for, rates are higher for longer, and how do you plan around that, hoping for interest rates to come down, because that will be a benefit for commercial real estate.
Do you want to add to that? I know you just did your presentation.
I have bad news for you. The market has been begging for interest rate cuts since the Fed started raising rates in March of 2022. That day, they were saying, when are we going to get cut? They went from 0 to 0.25%. When are we going back down to 0? I just don't see it. So one of the Fed governors mentioned that yesterday. or earlier this week that maybe it's time for a cut, that conditions are tight enough. I don't see how that can possibly be in 2024 when inflation's not back to the 2% target. And it's not close enough. We're still, like I said, well above on the metric that they care most about, it's called core PCE, but it strips out volatile elements like food and energy. It's still at like 3.7%, 3.5%. The Fed's power is all in its credibility. If they don't drive it all the way back there and then start cutting rates, they lose their credibility and they lose a lot of their power. So I just don't see how they can cut rates. It doesn't mean they're going to, I think they're probably done raising rates at this point, but I think rate cuts at the very earliest late 2024, but probably 2025.
And from a commercial real estate perspective, running the companies, Curtis, I actually agree with you. We're planning for that. I said hope. So we're actually, and that's just the way we have to plan. We're not counting on really relief in the commercial real estate sector till 2025. That's the way we're planning. Yeah.
The one hope so if inflation comes down a lot faster than it has, and then maybe the Fed can consider in the middle of 2024. Housing prices are not fully, so they I have a chart, we couldn't go, let's not go back to it, but housing prices went way up during COVID, then they came way down, and then they're rising again. There's lags in how it gets put into the inflation data. The downside hasn't fully been incorporated. If that gets incorporated and inflation really starts to come down, maybe they can cut sooner.
One of the challenges, if I could just add to that, not only is this affecting consumers with purchases like home and automotive, it also affects corporations when we're looking at capital investments. And within the semiconductor industry, there's been a lot of discussion on how do you build a more resilient supply chain, and is there more onshoring or friendshoring, and that all takes a large amount of capital investment. So it does have a ripple effect through many different sectors of the industry.
Okay, so I'm going to lean into that a little. Yasmin, you're talking about supply chain. Just amongst us, this private group here, how are you guys?
Not YouTube.
Yeah, I know, right, not on YouTube. So we have these challenges like the supply chain, most definitely. For your industry and for Adam, we have these, really aggressive interest rates that are going to be staying at levels that they are right now. So, recognizing that, Adam, you mentioned you're planning for it. I'm sure, Yasmin, you're planning for it. Can you share with the audience, like, how are you guys preparing for it, and maybe, kind of assist other business owners and, other industries on how you guys are preparing it in a little bit more granular detail? Supply chain and then, interest rates.
Sure.
Credit market.
No, absolutely. So supply chain, as we all know, was a major gap highlighted during COVID. I think I'd gone from being in an industry that no one had ever heard about to an industry that was on the front of newspapers almost every day. And there are multiple factors on how do you build a more resilient supply chain. Analog Devices is a hybrid manufacturing company, which means we have internal manufacturing facilities and we have long-standing partnerships with external manufacturing suppliers. And that allows us to flex demand across multiple geographies, multiple regions of the world. And I'll talk about a few different characteristics that the industry is working on to improve our situation of supply chain. And then I'll give some numbers from Analog Devices, just since that's what I'm most familiar with. You'll hear a lot about dual sourcing. So dual sourcing is basically, can I build this same exact product in more than one location? And in 2022, so not that long ago, ADI had a 20% rate. We could only dual source 20% of our products, which meant that 80% relied on a single location in the world. That's a gap. So we've been putting together a 5-year plan. We're in the midst of it. And at the end of that 5-year plan, we will have 70% of our portfolio that can be dual sourced. And I'd say that's fairly consistent across the industry. The other piece that you'll hear about is high-risk geographies. Can you manufacture in locations of the world that are considered U.S. friendly? And fortunately at ADI, we're in a much better position there. We can manufacture 96% of our portfolio in U.S. friendly locations. That's not necessarily the case across the full semiconductor industry, and it's an area where there is a lot of focus on improving. I see it as a combination of internal investment. We all need to spend our own money in order to increase capacity. We also need to work with external partners to make the ability to bring process nodes from other locations into more diverse geographic locations. And we also need government incentives to help really solidify a robust semiconductor supply chain.
Thank you. So if, while we're all feeling the pains of supply chain, if it disproportionately, and it did disproportionately impact the tech industry, I feel like the current interest rate environment, the post-commercial real estate environment has a huge disproportionate impact on your industry. Adam, what are you doing, and how are you kind of, in a proactive manner, kind of addressing that and planning for that?
Sure. Yeah, it has affected. We invest across the spectrum. We invest all types of real estate, from multifamily to office. We have 90 million square feet of office that we could talk about, but industrial and hotels and healthcare. And it really varies depending upon the type of asset class. And all asset classes have been affected negatively by what's going on. Probably the least negative has been warehouses and industrial, really being buoyed up by what's going on in e-commerce. And obviously the most affected has been office buildings has been the most affected. What we're doing is really focusing on two things. And the most important is probably maintaining liquidity and trying to deal with our balance sheet. And what I mean by that is everybody in the commercial real estate sector is dealing with maturing debt. And it's harder to refinance that debt when it comes due. We are very fortunate that we have a very large unencumbered asset pool. So as our debts come due, we are actually turning it mostly into secured debt. And that's what we've been focused on. And we're trying to deal with our maturities very much in advance. So we're almost done with dealing with refinancing all of our 24 maturities. We're starting to get into our 25 maturities. It's trying to maintain liquidity in this environment, as well as dealing with the balance sheet, basically. The other thing we're doing, and it's true in commercial real estate, is, for several years, running commercial real estate or turning around commercial real estate was hard, but it wasn't that hard when you had lowering interest rates and lowering cap rates, meaning if you bought a property, you want to turn it around, you may put some carpet and paint on it, and you might be able to sell it at a lower cap rate without having to do much work. It is now a time where you have to really sort of work hard, and you really sort of distinguish yourself. It's no longer just riding the wave of a strong economy. It's no longer riding the wave of lowering interest rates and lower cap rates. You actually have to perform better than the guy next to you. And I think what that means in our industry is there's going to be a lot of washout. I think we're good in terms of, because we didn't maintain much debt and all that, most of that debt was unsecured. But I think that unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of folks in the real estate space, especially have a lot of office product, that are going to go through a very, very difficult time.
So this was not in the questions I gave you before, but this is just me being super curious. You guys all get the benefit of this. So, being in the commercial real estate space, you have a different segments of our economy renting space. Are you seeing any segments more impacted than others, just like in your, assessment?
Well, look, here in Boston, life science is one of the strongest sectors. Medical office buildings, one of the strongest sectors. It's really those types of niche sectors that you can't really do their work from home. You have to come into the office. I mean, Boston as a market, we look at our downtown and we say it's not doing well. I can tell you we have properties here in Boston all over the country. Sunbelt, New York, Boston, it's probably doing among the better markets. You go to the West Coast, we have properties in San Francisco, LA, Seattle, Portland. I mean, it's very tough in those markets is what we're seeing. So that's basically it.
Well, thank you.
I can give a little bit different perspective I'm not in it like you are, but just I follow it because I think it's an important issue. It seems like the office buildings that are in the most desirable locations, the urban core where people want to be, are doing okay, but they have to be modern. They have to have the modern amenities that workers want so that businesses can get them to come into the office. It's buildings that are not in those desirable locations, that are not modern, that are under the most stress. And it doesn't matter which city you're in. If you're outside that outlying area, the core area, and you have an older building, it's going to be pretty rough.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's interesting. We underwent a renovation, and of course it opened in COVID, so great timing for the renovation of our campus to open up. But it is absolutely a recruiting tool now, because we have to have those modern offices in order to recruit talent to come into our facilities. Otherwise, it's seen as a turnoff, and talent won't come.
and there might be some bounce back. Businesses want workers back. Workers don't want to come back. If the labor market tightens and they can kind of force them back more, then it'll increase occupancy. But until you have that tightening, it's going to remain weak.
Excellent. And this is another round robin in like 30 seconds or less, because I get the sign that 2 minutes before we open it up to Q&A. What do you see as being our biggest opportunities and biggest challenges in the Massachusetts market?
In the Massachusetts market, the biggest challenge is economic competitiveness in this market. Unfortunately, it's a very high tax state. It's an economic burden to do business here. You know, we have the benefit of the universities and hospitals, especially here in Boston, that do sort of buoy up, bring the economy up. But, we are a tough place to do business. That's a challenge. From an opportunity, look, what's going on in AI and life sciences, those are industries that are still growing very much, and there's a lot of capital investment. Massachusetts, Boston, already is a leader in life science, can be a leader in artificial intelligence. Those are opportunities, I think, for Massachusetts to really benefit.
Thank you. Yasmin?
Workforce shortages, my number one challenge. Semiconductor industry is growing at an exponential rate. So we're estimating that by 2030, the industry will need another 115,000 jobs in the U.S., and at current graduation rates of advanced degrees, technical training programs, we won't be able to fill half. So that's a significant problem. And that's just semiconductors. There are other strategically important technology industries that are competing for the same talent. So that's our number one challenge. For opportunity, we see climate change as an urgent issue that's going to continue to have social and economic impact. The great thing is that Boston has emerged as a world-leading innovation hub for climate hardware. So we are leaning into that. We're partnering with local nonprofits like Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute to bring together world-leading experts on ocean with advanced technology companies to try to solve this problem collaboratively and to help inform policy on what to do to make this challenge something in our past.
I'll just add, as a great segue, the worker shortage is going to be a major issue. We're going to have some kind of immigration reform to get the skilled workers we need. You can't fix this quickly with changing birth rates and fertility, and that's not something you can fix with public policy. It's a cultural issue. So we're going to need immigration. But then this is really important for Boston, is that we have I get into this more with a longer presentation, but we're in this situation because we have succeeding generations after the baby boomer generation just weren't big enough. Enrollment in college and higher education is going to start to shrink. And those colleges that are watching this are getting ahead of the curve because there's going to be fewer students enrolling going forward. So that's going to be a particular challenge for all higher ed, but Boston being so concentrated will be a particular challenge here. But then the optimistic outlook is that people ask, like, well, what is the rest of the world doing? And is the United States going to remain the reserve currency? And my answer to that is every other country in the world would rather be us right now. We did better during COVID. We're doing better in the aftermath of COVID. We did better with inflation. Again, we're the envy of the world when it comes to the economy. And no matter how many mistakes we make, we seem to always come out better than the rest of the world.
I love that. I wish we could just stop there because that was optimistic. But alas, we're going to open it up to questions.
Hi, thank you for these contributions already. I'm Tristan from Climate Partner. A question I have about the government spending that we're having now. Billions of dollars be going into the CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act, with a target also to get manufacturing supply chains back to the U.S. I'm always wondering, why is it called the Induction Reflation Act? If you're bringing workforce back to the U.S., wages are higher, we're being less competitive towards the outside world. How do we reduce inflation by doing that?
Curtis, I think that's you, Curtis.
Yeah, the answer is it's an inside DC answer. They needed a 50th vote or 51st vote. I can't remember now. It's been over a year, but that was the price for Joe Manchin to vote for it. It had to be called the Inflation Reduction Act. It could have. Yeah. That was it.
It was definitely a Curtis question.
Yeah, that was it. There's absolutely nothing in that bill that would reduce inflation, but that was the key issue at the time. It still is, but that they had to call it that. Ultimately, I don't think it's going to that bill and it's not going to reduce inflation, but I don't think it necessarily increases inflation. What I think is kind of interesting, if you tie the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act together, there's a huge amount of subsidies and spending to kind of reshore. And I always thought that was going to happen after COVID. And if you kind of look at those three bills together, we did have a big effort. And it's having a really big impact on the construction industry. There's a huge, construction's going way up, but in manufacturing, and it's for the electric batteries and the chips. But keep in mind that for every dollar that's being spent there for those manufacturing facilities, it probably would have gone somewhere else. So it's not +1, it's +1 and -1 somewhere else. It's a shift of resources.
Another question? Gentleman with the glasses, then Greg.
Thank you. Chris Anstey with Bloomberg News. So Adam was touching on this a little bit earlier, but we know that that companies, much like households, during the pandemic, took advantage of super low interest rates to kind of term out their borrowing and refinanced at very low rates. And I'm just wondering, again, as Adam was kind of pointing to, as these loans roll over and need to be refinanced, and as indeed new finance is necessary for projects such as what Yasmin was talking about, to what extent do you see this kind of great debt repricing having a break on the economy in 2024? Is this more of a 2025 thing, or indeed is there a large volume of debt that is coming due next year that has to be refinanced at much higher rates, and to what degree is that going to impose a break on the economy?
So, talking about what's going on in commercial real estate in our own experience, as we refinance debt, generally it's about twice as expensive. So let's say we had a loan that was 3.5, now it's 7, is what we're paying as we refinance that debt. I think, as you look at commercial real estate loans coming due, and there's lots of charts around this, this is my own view. Roughly half the loans is the way I think about it, especially around office as they're coming due in 2024. I think about half of them are going to get refinanced and half are going to be given back, or it's going to be a really tough workout that's going to happen. We are going through, in my view, especially on the office side, but it's affecting other parts of commercial real estate too. This is not going to happen fast. It's going to take 24 into 25. There's going to be a very painful period we're going through, which is there's leverage coming out of the system. There's leverage coming out of the commercial real estate system. And whenever you have a deleveraging time, it's very, very painful. And that's the way we're planning. Look, we also lend against real estate. It's a small part of our business, but it's actually it's the best part of our business because banks have pulled back so much. It's the only part in our $42 billion of real estate that we manage that we're actually growing. And we actually put a significant amount of money out this year is because there's opportunity to lend because there's been so much of a pullback from banks and other insurance companies and other traditional lenders in real estate. So it's going to hurt the economy, but it's also an opportunity if you can take advantage of it.
Thank you. Anybody want to follow up?
I'll just add that what Adam just went through is that there's a the reason why the Fed can pause is there's a lot of refinancing that has to happen. It's not just in commercial real estate. It's all other types of business lending. So there's tightening to occur just by the timing of loans expiring.
I think we had one more question. Greg?
Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for your insights this morning. They're very helpful. Curtis, you talked a little bit about consumer spending and how that's being funded by credit card debt. Can the panel comment a little bit on government spending and all these initiatives that we have worldwide and how we're financing that? Should we have been issuing longer-term U.S. Treasuries to finance that?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's the one risk I didn't get to is the debt. We have an enormous debt that is going to become a huge issue going forward because the Treasury buys short-term dated bonds, doesn't buy 30-year bonds to finance most of the debt. So we're interest is becoming a much bigger part of the budget. It's going to be as big as defense. It's going to be right behind Social Security and Medicare in terms of size of taking up the budget. This has been a problem for a long time. Part of my job when I was at the Heritage Foundation was to go around, and I did this for 10 years, talking about problems with debt and deficits, and no one cared. And voters still don't care. If you look at who are likely to be the presidential nominees next year, they don't care. That means that Congress will not do anything about it. So it's going to be a major issue that won't be dealt with until 2029. And at that point, it could be really, really painful. But that's just how Washington works. They don't do things until they absolutely have to, and they don't absolutely have to do anything until probably about then. And it's going to be, we're talking cuts to Social Security, cuts to Medicare, because that's where the money is. There's no other way to get down to a sustainable levels of debt and deficits without making changes to those programs.
Oh, thank you. I want to thank everybody for their comments. I want to thank the audience for their questions. And I think it's all you now, Jim. Yeah.
I want to, thanks, please. So I know we're at time, but I'm going to take one more minute to just try to bring in some narrative for the small business community out there. And I'd like to sort of get on the line. I'm not going to let you get away without sort of adding your perspective, Grace. I know you service small businesses, and I'd like your perspective on sort of what small businesses can be expect, what you're seeing and what they can expect. Curtis, you mentioned small business confidence being low. What's your thoughts on that? And I think, both Yasmin and Adam probably have some supplier communities in the small business community that depend on larger institutions and what they do. What's your outlook for them? So why don't we get on the line and just talk about our small business community?
Yes, for our small business, our division is the business banking division. We're actually seeing a lot of momentum in Massachusetts. So I have to say that while there's still a lot of trepidation, there still seems to be a lot of entrepreneurial spirit going forward, especially like in the Boston, Worcester area. We see a lot of businesses, a lot of, as you shared with us in a different event, 80% of all businesses are started by immigrants, and we're seeing a diverse pool of businesses being actually being initiated and ignited in Massachusetts. So these are all positive signs that we're seeing, and notwithstanding the higher interest rates, we are seeing a lot of collaboration with the mass development, our state and local partners. So this is something that I think the communities are really leaning into. So that's one thing that I've noticed more of, is there seems to be more education on not just funding through traditional sources, but collaborations through not-for-profits, state entities, and traditional banking units.
Right.
So we have of course, big businesses that are members, but we have a lot of small businesses as well, and we have a small business council, and I gave them similar presentation not that long ago, and that's where I had to add those weak points in the economy, because they were telling me the economy is not good. And I think, so I had a long conversation with the person who manages our small business members, and I think it comes down to small businesses are getting hit harder by inflation, and hit harder by the worker shortage, because they have to keep paying higher wages that they can't afford. And so they feel it a lot more than even bigger businesses, and they're vocal about it.
What about your suppliers? What can they expect?
Well, can I take the perspective of tech startups?
Yes, please.
So also important to this area. So for those of you who don't know, Analog Devices, we're an American semiconductor company. We're headquartered in Wilmington, Massachusetts. We were started in 1965 by 2 MIT graduates. So we were part of the Cambridge startup world, where we've now grown into a $12 billion annual company that employs over 26,000 people across 35 countries. So the success story of ADI, in my opinion, reflects what the state of Massachusetts does very well. It enables entrepreneurial ideas that mature into organizations, harnessing the amazing talent that we have in this area to build world-leading technologies. It's part of our DNA. It is absolutely part of the Massachusetts innovation spirit, and it helps keep us competitive even today.
Thank you. Adam? So
we probably come in contact with small businesses mostly through the trades here in Massachusetts, through construction and development activity. I'll tell you that they all seem to be doing pretty well in 23, but our interactions with them, and I hate to end on a downer, is they're all pretty worried about 24. The pipeline for construction activity and development activity is waning, especially here in Eastern Massachusetts. And I know that the trades we deal with, while they're busy now, they don't have a backlog into 24, and so they're nervous.
Yeah, it's been a while since there's been a big groundbreaking. So anyway, well, please join me in thanking M&T Bank, WBUR, all of our panelists for an informative conversation. And thank you all. Have a wonderful holiday season. And here's to a great 2024.
Thank you.